I think the biggest mistake a buyer can make is trying to do DD before they've actually gone and engaged the experts to handle it for them.
Yeah.
We're there for a reason.
Yeah.
We're there because the words on the page aren't always the answer.
Right.
There's a body of legislation as high as me that will impart a lot of terminology, interpretation in these contracts. It harbours and fosters and protects the industry. So what you read on a page might not necessarily be the exact answer.
So Trent Pevy from Pevy Lawyers, thank you for joining me today and sharing some insight into the industry. Give us some insight as to what Pevy Law does and how you're specialist in the industry.
I first came into the management rights industry in 1998 and worked for a number of firms and then set up my own practice, Pevy Lawyers, in 2010. So we've been going pretty solidly for 15 years. We've now got the largest team of transactional lawyers and paralegals in the industry.
Yeah.
That allows us to mobilise quick, make sure momentum in a transaction's kept, turning things around as quickly as humanly possible. I bought my first management rights with partners in 2012. So over the 13-year span, there's been probably 24 buildings I've been involved with. Not all winners, but the vast majority of them are. I love investing in what I know and understand. So as a result, I've always been a big believer in the industry. I've tried to instill that in all of our team, that this is a great area full of good people and excellent opportunity for sustainable returns.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to speak to industry professionals that have a bit of skin in the game.
Yes.
There's nothing quite like knowing by having your finger on the pulse, being in the industry. Summarise, if you will, management rights. What are they, and why would someone potentially look to get involved?
For me, management rights is a byproduct of strata living. As we become bigger metropolises and people are having to live closer to one another, high density, there's going to be a lot more shared facilities. Those shared facilities need looking after. And it's been proven the best way to look after those shared facilities and deliver return value for all the stakeholders in a building is through management rights. It's extremely successful in Queensland. Other states haven't necessarily had the same legislative strength as what we've got in Queensland, but there's still there's pockets where management rights operations are thriving. Pairing up with the looking after the common property is the services that can be provided to investor owners. People who buy an investment unit, naturally people only buy an investment unit if they're looking to get some sort of return out of it, be it the capital growth in it or a yield through obtaining rents, tariffs if they're short-term letting. They need somebody to execute that for them. And that's where the person who's responsible for the presentation of the complex is often best placed to be the person who's attracting guests or presenting them the best way possible to achieve the best tenants that they can find.
I think from my role and your role in the industry are very different. And obviously, we have I typically work with a buyer and a seller, and you typically work with everything both and in between. Give us some insight into how a buyer can potentially assess whether it's a management rights is a good opportunity or is a right fit for them.
Sure. So if a buyer's looking at management rights, I think the first thing they need to appreciate is that when you're looking to find that building, and that's where a company such as yours is the matchmaker. It's probably the best way of putting it, isn't it? Trying to pair the people with the right properties that are going to meet their objectives. They can only do that if they're prepared to make assumptions. Assumptions that the material that the seller is providing about their business is accurate, that obviously someone like yourself is telling them the right thing during the sales process. Those assumptions are a natural thing. They're not something to be trepidatious about. They're not something to be fearful of. Our job as the lawyers, once an offer has been accepted, is to change assumptions into facts. Now, hopefully, in a perfect world, the facts meet the assumptions, in which case we get through to settlement and everyone's happy. Occasionally, though, whether it's the fact that a seller might not be quite aware of what they, certain things that might have impacted their business since they purchased it, changing trends, be it commercially or legislatively, those things can also change what is important for a business from an operational point of view or resale. So our job is to help the buyer make an informed decision, not just on assumptions, before they're at the point of no return. And
so due diligence,
Exactly, due diligence. I think one of the best things that the management rights sector really focused on when this area was pioneered by the generation before me is that buyers should have an ample opportunity to do that research, have that due diligence done, to make sure that what they're buying is what's been represented to them. In some different areas of business purchases, you don't have that same period afforded to a buyer. As a result, I think it's one of those industries where you can go into it knowing that the due diligence process will make you very prepared for operating your business, but also give you a really good sign as to whether that business is going to thrive and meet those objectives.
And Trent, someone buying a business or management rights for the first time, summarise briefly the key steps from entering the market, looking what's out there, to going to contract and obviously going to settlement. Give us the brief summary for a buyer in that first acquisition.
Sure. Well, aside from liaising with someone like yourself to find out what they actually want and explore what options are out there available to them, once an offer is accepted, that's when we tend to get involved. And we will quarterback the transaction from basically the acceptance of offer stage right through to completion. That will require negotiating a review of contracts. Again, that's quite a fast process though, because all the lawyers in the industry have collegially got together and agreed a form of contract that can allow us to get a contract quite quickly. That contract will have usually 3 get-out rights. If the figures are no good, you can get out. If there's problems in due diligence, you can get out. If you don't secure finance to the extent that you need to give, you can get out of the contract. Only once that has been, those 3 key items have been ticked off from a buyer's perspective, is the buyer then fully locked in. We call that the unconditional stage. The last port of call in the contract is getting the consent of the body corporate, who is essentially the person who you're buying these contracts with, to consent to the sale. Now, importantly, the body corporate cannot unreasonably refuse consent. Now, that mouthful really means that they need to have an extremely good reason. In having acted on over 3,000 transactions, I can say I can still count the number of body corporate no's on my fingers and toes. So it's a very high ratio, comfortably into the high, 98, 99% of transactions.
Now, something that we probably don't speak about enough, but you would certainly see this. What would be some of the common mistakes or pitfalls that a buyer should be wary of, coming in and going through the process of legal DD?
I think the biggest mistake a buyer can make is trying to do DD before they've actually gone and engaged the experts to handle it for them. We're there for a reason. We're there because the words on the page aren't always the answer. There's a body of legislation as high as me that will impart a lot of terminology, interpretation in these contracts. It harbours and fosters and protects the industry. So what you read on a page might not necessarily be the exact answer to it. So we always try and encourage clients to take our advice and make sure they trust the process, trust the purchase process. I'm very fond of saying to especially new entrants to the industry, deal with the things that are most likely to make you want to run for the hills. There's no point leaving the big ticket item to the back end of the transaction. If there's something that's particularly concerning you, let's look at that straight up first and foremost. That saves wasting the seller's time. It saves wasting their time as a buyer, their resources as well. So trusting the process is probably the big thing, and then not trying to do your own due diligence yourself.
Okay. Now, obviously, again, back to my side of things, there's typically a buyer and a seller. The seller in this equation, what would be some of the challenges they would face when looking to list or go to market?
Thanks, Sid. So in terms of selling, it's a really dynamic area of industry. It's a dynamic area of law that covers that industry. So the first thing I'd say to a seller is just be aware things aren't necessarily going to be the same as when you bought 10 years ago. Those trends change. What's commercially acceptable to a buyer these days is different to what it was back then. The attitudes of a body corporate and the people who advise them are different to what it may have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. Even 3 years ago, the things that a buyer and a buyer's lawyer and accountant are looking for are different to what they were. So you've got to be nimble, you've got to be able to pivot, you've got to present your business in the absolute best manner that you can. I feel strongly that one of those important things you should be doing is, whether it's me or one of my competitors, is going and getting your agreements checked out at the time of listing or even pre-listing. I know, Sid, someone like yourself, you're always very enthusiastic about making sure those things are fixed before you go and list as well. So I know you've been very encouraging in that regard. The business will be scrutinised in incredible depth by both the accountant, the lawyer and a valuer. Things just don't slip through the cracks. Be open, be transparent, know exactly what your agreements say and do. In a minute level, we're looking at term, that's left on the agreements. Have the agreements been topped up properly in the past? What sort of other variations have been there? If you've got bad body corporate relationships, tell us about it. We can try and present it in a manner that is not going to make a buyer be terrified about the relationships you might have. It may be the case that a lot of your issues with your building are just personality related. Now, personality clashes is never seen as a negative during due diligence. If anything, it's seen as an opportunity for a buyer to come in and have a better relationship. So sometimes the way we have to package up those things when we're acting for a seller is part of the real value that we add.
Yeah. So some of the things it's a constantly evolving and changing landscape in management rights, as you know, and some of the things that I'm up against in my role is having a good understanding of the history of that scheme. A scheme might be 20 or 30 years plus old, and over time things have changed and they evolve and new deeds of variation occur. At what point would you suggest reviewing those caretaking and letting agreements would be a really positive for any current or outgoing vendor?
Sid, one of the most popular parts of any presentation I make today, regardless of the setting or forum, is talking about doing away with if we're adding more years, we can only do it by deed of variation. Now, we know under Queensland law, the most number of years you can add in one go by deed of variation is 5 years. So if you want to top up your agreements with 18 years to go, using a deed of variation, you can only go to 23. Because this area of law has been extremely stable since 1997, there are a lot of old agreements out there. And if I've got to say if a client comes to me and says, Trent, we want you to check out this duty in my agreement, or what does it say about office hours, or do I need to live on site? And I say, yeah, no problem, send me through your copies of your agreements, and then they send me 15 different documents. Straight away, you can see that that's a lot more confusing, not just for the managed rights operator, but also the body corporate. If we've got agreements that are made up of multiple different documents, we strongly encourage, especially where a manager has good relationships with their body corporate, to embark upon the journey of getting a new agreement. The biggest advantage to a new agreement, aside from the fact that you can return it to 25 years in the accommodation module or 10 years in the standard module, is that when you're selling your agreements, the lawyer who's conducting the due diligence do not need to look back any earlier than when the date of those new agreements are put in place. So we might be doing due diligence on a building that is 25, 30 years old. And if they've got new agreements from, say, 2023, that's all we need to look at. So you're making your business more appealing from a documentation side straight away, compared to saying, here's a whole bunch of documents going right back to 2000, check out all of these. Because I can virtually guarantee you, we will always find defects in the process. And then it becomes a game of, what can we live with, what can't we? Where's the risks arise in the event that you buy these managed rights and you have issues when you're in there. If the agreements are absolutely squeaky clean and very new, you're mitigating that risk enormously. I cannot undersell that.
So effectively streamlining the process and getting a better result quicker, right? Give us some operational considerations from a vendor's point of view. What legal responsibility and obligations do on-site manager have to the scheme, and compliance and these types of things when representing any strata title?
One of the key operational focal points for any manager should be providing a conduit between owners, the body corporate manager, who's handling the administrative side of the scheme, providing that conduit between them, contractors that come onto the site to repair things, specialists who might be doing, be it balustrading works, or even just something as simple as pool testing, the pool testing, or chopping limbs off trees and things like that are not in a safe area for a layperson like you or me to do. That conduit, if you're creating bad vibes and bad attitude in that, it ripples throughout the whole sector. You need to pick and choose your battles. That's a really important thing. We've acted for people who have gone into managed rights, and on the very first night they're there, they've gone and got into a stoush with the chairperson over noise or something like that. Guys, you're not the body corporate policeman. Your job is to observe and report to the committee of that strata scheme on those bylaws. So you're picking and choosing battles is a big one. The other thing I would say is, and this might sound a bit corny, but be seen doing the work as well. There's no point not having a visual presence in the complex. The managed rights operator is typically the biggest budget expense for a body corporate. The biggest component of body corporate levies is going to the caretaker. So it's important that the caretaker shows that everyone is getting value for that service.
Someone entering the industry, Trent, for the first time, what kind of advice would you potentially give them going through the process?
I think probably the main thing from a new entrant to the industry is be honest with yourself. Are you a people person? Are you capable of showing empathy? Are you able to balance competing interests? Living in a strata scheme is no different to the rest of society. There's people looking out for themselves, and as a manager, you are the conduit between all these different factions and needs and wants and desires. There's a lot of different stakeholders in a building. So being comfortable that you can sometimes be a peacemaker, sometimes also be the aggressor to make sure people are doing the right thing. Balancing those things, being prepared to work hard as well, I think is another thing. The industry once upon a time, and I'm going back probably 20 years ago, sold this as a ticket to retirement. It isn't that. Budgets, you are the biggest budget component in a body corporate levy. So body corporates want to get value. They want to get value out of what they're paying. So it isn't just a job you take on without an expectation that you're going to work hard. Don't get me wrong, you are your own boss. Despite the fact you've got a contract with the body corporate, it's up to you as to how you discharge your duties. Coming into it with a good work ethic and an ability to be able to liaise and get the best out of everybody, I think is important.
So Trent Pevy's top 3 tips for a buyer or a seller. Give us some wisdom, and what would your 3 tips be?
So the 3 tips. First one, applicable to whether you're selling or buying, trust the process. These businesses have been transacted now for several decades. We know what works, and we also know equally what doesn't tend to work. So follow the process that your advisors set out. From a seller's perspective, you need to be patient. You're not necessarily going to know you've got a deal with a buyer until a couple of months after that contract's signed. That's done for a reason. We want to make sure that buyers coming into the industry are informed and that they're buying something they know. That they're aware of and that they're prepared for. From a buyer's perspective, they also have to show patience as well, but take the advice of the advisor that you've got. There's no point trying to bush lawyer or bush accountant your way into these businesses. It's an area of specialty for a reason. There is a huge amount of legislation which protects this industry and makes it the investment that it is.
Trent, there's a reason why you're respected in the industry, and your advice is very well cherished by a lot. Thank you very much today for your time. Really appreciate it.